Section 5.4 Applications. This is a section that contains word problems. So what we want to do is make sure that we understand that we need to do a few things. One, make sure you read the problem carefully. If you have to reread it, please do that. And make sure you always use two variables for this section. And when we read the problem, we want to make sure that we understand that there will be two unknowns, two things that we're looking for, so that's why we have to use two variables. Let's look at the first example. It says the difference between two numbers is 17. 4 times the smaller is equal to 7 more than the larger. What are the numbers? So what we're doing is we have to find two numbers. So we have two unknowns, and we're going to just use two variables and also write two equations. Two unknowns means you need to write two equations. So what are the two unknowns? Well, since I have two numbers, one of them should always be smaller and the other one will be larger, so we could just label it that way. So we could start with x, say x is the larger number, and then we can call y the smaller number. Once we have our two unknowns labeled, then we write two equations. The two equations come from translating the word problem. The first sentence will give us the first equation, and the second sentence will give us the second equation. We just have to translate carefully. So we have our first step here. Our second step is write two equations. So let's see. It says the difference between two numbers is 17. Difference means we have to subtract. So we just basically subtract our two numbers and the answer is 17. Make sure you write the larger number first. Okay, second equation, translate 4 times the smaller. All right, so 4 times y, that's the smaller, is equal to 7. More than is add. More than what? More than the larger. Larger is x. I have two equations here. Two equations, two variables. We solve by using addition method, or we can use substitution. I'm going to use the addition method, but I have to make sure that the variables line up before I use the addition method. So what I'm going to do is leave the first equation as is. The second equation, we have to subtract x. That way we have x and y on this side, so it matches the first equation. So all we're going to do is, again, leave the first equation and then subtract x, which gives me negative x plus 4y is equal to 7. The reason I did this is because I noticed that I would have x and negative x, and I can automatically this automatically gives me 0, so it eliminates the x's, and it's pretty quick to solve from here. So we get rid of x, negative y plus 4y, that gives me 3y, and then 17 plus 7 gives us 24, and when we solve for y, we get 8. So basically the smaller number is 8. What's the larger number? Go back to one of your equations. Use equation 1. It's easier to get x. So we substitute for y. We have x minus 8 is equal to 17. And then you're going to add 8 to both sides, and x comes out to be 25. And that is our larger number. And then we're done. And of course you can check your two answers. Just check, plug them back into your two equations, make sure that it works. Next example. Okay, so this is a different type of problem. This is a distance, rate, time problem. So we have this example here, and what we want to do is read carefully, underline the parts of the problem that we have to use, and we're also going to have this table where we could put our information. So first thing is read the problem. It says Randy made a business trip of 190 miles. So 190 miles is the total distance he traveled. So I'm going to underline it because we have to use it. He averaged 52 miles per hour for the first part of the trip and 56 miles per hour for the second part of the trip. I need to use that too, so I underline it. If the total trip took 3.5 hours, so the total time is 3.5 hours, how long did he travel at each rate? So how long means that we have to find time. So that's what we're looking for. There will be 2 times. One time for the first part and a second for the second part. So you're looking for how long was he traveling for part 1 and how long was he traveling for part 2. What's the time for both? So what we're going to do is remember this equation here. Rate times time equals distance. This should be memorized. You do need to know this. And we're going to plug in our information here. So we have 52 miles per hour for the first part. That's a rate. So remember, rate is always given, in this case, miles per hour. Time will be in hours. Distance is in miles. Make sure you have your units correct. So part 1 is 52. Part 2 is 56. By the way, when you make your table, you have to make your table for the test. When you make your table, the equation goes at the top. You have to label the 2 sides. So you have to make sure you put part 1, part 2, because if you don't label this part, you won't know where to put the numbers. So this has to be labeled. We do not know the time, right? So since I don't know what the time is for each part, then just use 2 variables, x and y. Okay, according to the formula, I have to multiply rate times time, and that should give me the distance. So if I multiply across, I get 52x and I get 56y. So here's my table. We have to now write 2 equations. So when you write your 2 equations, what you're going to do is look at the distance column, look at the time column. You are given a total number, 190 miles. That's the total distance for the whole trip. So I have the distance for part 1 and the distance for part 2. If you add these together, you should get 190 miles. That's our first equation. We will put that right here. 52x plus 56y should be 190 miles. Okay, let's look at the time column. Time for part 1 plus time for part 2 should be equal to the total time for the trip. Total time for the trip is 3.5 hours. So that's what we have to use for equation 2. X plus y is equal to 3.5. I'm going to write this as a decimal because it's just easier to calculate. We have 2 equations, 2 variables. We could solve using addition or substitution. I am going to use the substitution method just because I see that these numbers are bigger, so I think it'll just be easier to use substitution, although it doesn't matter. But let's use substitution. Take the easier equation, equation 2, and I'm going to solve this equation for x. So to solve for x, we subtract y from both sides. We get that x is equal to 3.5 3.5 minus y. I'm going to take this and we're going to substitute it into the first equation for x. Okay, so if I do that, we're going to get, I'll just move over here. We're going to get 52. Make sure that you are using parentheses, 3.5 minus y plus 56y is equal to 190. Okay, we have to distribute. You multiply 52 times 3.5, 182 minus 52y plus 56y is equal to 190. Combine like terms, 182 plus 4y is equal to 190. Subtract 182 from both sides. 4y is equal to 8. Divide by 4. Y is 2. Okay, so 2 what? It is 2 hours, and this is for, look back at the table, part 2. So this is the time for part 2. How do I get the time for part 1? Go back to the easier equation, x plus y equals to 3.5. Plug in 2 for y. X plus 2 is equal to 3.5. Subtract 2 from both sides. X comes out to be 1.5 hours, and this is for part 1. And that's the end of this problem. This problem's a little bit longer, so the calculation's a little bit longer. Maybe the equations are a little bit, like the numbers are bigger, so you have to be more careful with this type of problem. Example 3. This one is different. This one has to do with coins. So let's read the problem first. It says, Sonia has a total of 30 coins made up of nickels and dimes worth a total of $2. How many of each type of coin does she have? Okay, so what we could do is also use a table, and there's a formula here, so we need to follow the formula. You do need to memorize the formula, and you do need to know how to make the table for your test. So let's see. Formula is number of coins, okay, so how many coins times their value or their worth, like is it 25 cents, is it 10 cents, and then so you multiply number of coins times the value, and that gives you the total value, basically how much money you have. So we're going to fill in our table, and I did underline what's important here. You're given that you have a total of 30 coins. They're made up of nickels and dimes. Total amount of money we have is $2, and what you need to find, how many of each type of coin, means how many nickels and how many dimes do you have. That's what we have to find. So to fill in the first part of the table, we just use two variables because I do not know the number of nickels, nor do I know the number of dimes. So you could use X and Y, or you could use N and D. N and D is probably better, but I just used X and Y. How you label these doesn't really matter. Just make sure you know which one is nickels, which one is dimes. Okay, so in terms of the value, what I'm going to do is we want to do this we want to write the problem in terms of pennies instead of dollars. So for example, $2 in pennies is going to come out to be 200 pennies. So we're going to do this in terms of pennies. So I know that $2, which we have to use in a little bit, is the same as 200 pennies. So I think it's easier to do the problem in terms of pennies. Okay, so nickels are worth five pennies, right? And dimes are worth 10. And then to get the total value, we just again follow the formula, multiply across. You get 5x and 10y. Okay, so what we do is look at the total value column and the value column. I'm sorry, look at the total value and look at the number of coin column to write your two equations. If you add the number of nickels plus the number of dimes, that should be equal to 30 coins. So that's our first equation. Number of nickels plus number of dimes should be equal to 30 total coins. Then, if you add the total value for your nickels, total value for your dimes, that should be equal to 200 pennies. So the one thing you have to be careful with is if the total amount of money is given in dollars, make sure that you change it to pennies, because the 5 and the 10, this is given as pennies, so you have to have pennies here. The units have to match. Two equations and two unknowns. I'm going to use addition method, and I want to eliminate x. So what we're going to do is multiply equation 1 by -5. And when you do that, make sure that you multiply, the whole thing, the whole equation by -5. Okay, so I multiply x, y, and 30. Okay, so when I do that, I'm going to get another equation here. Let's write it out. We're going to get -5x minus 5y is equal to -150. Okay, once that's done, recopy here. This is great practice for you to review addition method. We add. Notice we eliminate x. You're left with 5y is equal to 50. Divide by 5. Y comes out to be 10. Okay, y was the number of dimes, so 10 dimes. How many nickels? Go back to your easier equation. X plus y equals 30. Plug in 10. We'll do it right here. X plus 10 is equal to 30. Subtract subtract 10. We get x is equal to 20. 20 what? 20 nickels. Make sure you label. And then we're done. We have one more example. Okay, so this one has to do with a rectangle. It's basically reads, it says, the length of a rectangle is 1 meter less than twice the width. That has to be translated at some point, so we'll do that soon. If each side is increased by 4 meters, the perimeter will be 116 meters. Find the length and width of the original rectangle. Okay, so basically what's happening is that we have two rectangles. Okay, so for a rectangle, you've got your length, width, and width. And then I have this second rectangle because it says if each side is increased by 4 meters. So L plus 4, L plus 4, W plus 4, and W plus 4. So basically I take each of these sides, add 4 to them. I know the perimeter of the larger one. The perimeter is 116 meters. Okay, then we need to remember the formula for perimeter of a rectangle, which is 2 times the length plus 2 times the width is equal to the perimeter. Since you have two variables, one for width, one for length, we have to write two equations. So let's see what the two equations are. Well, I can write the equation for perimeter. Perimeter for the larger triangle, because I don't have the perimeter for the smaller one. So perimeter for the larger one is 116. So we're just going to input our information here. 2 times the length. The length here is L plus 4. So replace L in the formula with L plus 4. Replace W with W plus 4. So I'm going to write 2 times L plus 4 plus 2 times W plus 4 is equal to 116. Okay, so that's one equation. How do I get the second equation? Remember I said we have to translate this equation or sentence into an equation. That's where the second equation comes from. It says the length of a rectangle. So this is the length of the original. So that length translates to equals 1 meter less than twice the width. So 2W minus 1. Why did I switch the order? When you see less than, you switch the order. It's the last part first, first part second when you subtract. That's the rule for the less than translation. Okay, so these two equations, slightly more complicated, have to do just a little bit more work. I need to distribute the 2 and the 2 here, and I kind of have to rewrite the first equation. And also the second equation maybe, depending on how we want to solve. So let's see, let's start with the first equation. Put it right here. 2L plus 8 plus 2W plus 8 is equal to 116. And then we're going to combine our like terms. So 2L plus 2W is 16 equal to 116. And subtract 16 from both sides. Okay, so I have 2L plus 2W is equal to 100. And then we have this equation over here. So we have to basically solve. You can use substitution. I could just take, since this equation solved for L, just take this and plug it into here. So we could do that. Let's do that over here. We have 2 parentheses 2W minus 1 plus 2W is equal to 100. Distribute. Combine. And then what we need to do is add 2 to both sides. And then we have to divide by 6. Which gives us 17 for the width. So then we also have to find the length. And we can go back to the second equation here because that's easier. Plug in 17 to get the length. So our length is going to come out to be 2 times 17 minus 1. Well, that gives me 2 times 17, that's going to be 34 minus 1, so that's 33. And the units here are meters. And then we're done.